welcome to this session with Bena and Art. So this evening, we are going to talk about the habits of mind and also a chapter from our book, our newly published book, Mindfulness and Thoughtfulness. So we will be discussing different aspects of habits of mind and also how habits of mind relate to mindfulness and thoughtfulness. So I will be asking some questions to Art and Bena, but feel free to ask questions, write questions into the chat box. We will do our best to respond to your questions. So we hope you enjoy this session from wherever you are connecting. I'm connecting from Istanbul. It's evening time in Turkey, and good afternoon to you if you are connecting from other parts of the world. So this evening, we have got the co-founders of the Habits of Mind Institute, Art Costa and Bena, and they have their research and expertise have guided us a lot during our process of writing and editing this book, and they have contributed 2 chapters in this, our new published book. So Bena and Art, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit for our participants, maybe if they don't know you yet?
I'm Art Costa, and I'm a retired university professor from California State University at Sacramento, co-author, along with Bena, for the Habits of Mind, co-director of the Institute for Habits of Mind.
And he may say he's retired, but he's not tired. We can tell you that. And I'm Bena, and I am co-author and co-director with Art. And also I am a consultant, and I still do a fair amount of work, most of it virtually, but still out there in the field. So we try to keep in touch with what's going on. And we also, of course, have done many courses, and we are very excited about this new book because it will be such a contribution to practitioners around the world.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure for us to have you this evening. And I think that the time of the book is a great one because we are dealing so many challenges these days. And I think we all need to develop this 16 habits of mind. So I would like to start with my first question. What is a habit of mind?
A habit of mind is a disposition, and it's a thinking disposition. So it's what you do when you're faced with problems, conflicts, confusions, and it's how you respond to them. So these are 16 ways to respond when you don't know what to do. You know, in schools, we have been teaching students what to do and what to know, and we've forgotten that it's very important to know how you behave when you don't know what to do and when you're confused. So the habits of mind come into play when you're confronted with those very complex problems that cause us to think and problem solve and know how to interact with others and to seek help. So the habits of mind are what you do when you don't know what to do.
And I would just add to that it isn't only out of confusion. Sometimes you use a habit of mind because it helps your mind process. For example, when you're challenged by something that's a creative situation and you want to, be more creative. Well, what do you do when you want to be more creative? A lot of that has to do with your thoughtfulness, your capacity to be thinking flexibly, to be able to imagine something that you hadn't imagined previously. So it's all the kinds of what we call dispositions, your attitude, your willingness to lend your mind to situations so that you can actually do things in a way that's more thoughtful and perhaps even more successful and more effective than it was before you use these very important habits.
Thank you. So do you define in your chapter and in your books, you define 16 habits of mind. So are there only 16 habits of mind, or can there be more habits of mind? And what are these 16 habits of mind?
There could be a lot more habits of mind, and we would encourage people to add to the list. We find that 16 is enough to think about, and enough to teach towards, but that doesn't mean that that's all of them. For example, you might want to, there's one school that added joyfulness in learning. Great, add that. There are other types of thinking behaviors. For example, thinking in fantasy, being able to think beyond what is real. And so that's another way of thinking. We do that when we go to the movies and we see all of the creative ideas that the producers and the directors and the art directors show us on the screen. It's called chimeric thinking. So yeah, there are a lot of other different ways, but we found that in schools, particularly, 16 was very adequate, but we don't think it's limited to just 16. If you want to make up some more, that's great.
Art, you want to talk about the history of it, though, because it all started with you sort of developing this idea of intelligent behaviors and not really limited to schools. You were saying, how can we, people who want to behave as intelligently as possible, behave that way? And how can we also make sure that we're encouraging our children to behave that way? That's toward our mission in life, which is to create a more thoughtful world. So you started off with developing minds. You want to just talk about that?
Sure. Yes. Back in the 80s, 1980s, the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development invited me to edit a book on thinking. And so that's where this all started. And what I did was to write to leaders in the field throughout the world, deeply into thinking and describing what good thinkers do. People like Reuven Feuerstein in Israel, Gavriel Solomon in Israel, David Perkins in Boston at Harvard. So I searched and found a lot of people throughout the world who were advocates of good thinking. And I asked them to describe the attributes of what good thinkers do, and good thinkers being those that have demonstrated that they are good in problem solving, they are good in interacting with other people, that they are good at assuming a very positive stance towards confusion and challenging situations. And so what I got back was a lot of definitions and descriptions of intelligent people who are behaving in a problem-solving kind of a way, effectively and efficiently. And after a while, after receiving all these, I began to see some patterns because many of the people were saying much the same thing. For example, Reuven Feuerstein talked about how you manage your impulsivity, or he called it restraining impulsivity. But at the same time, David Perkins and Bob Schwartz talked about not being a hasty thinker. Well, that's the same thing. Instead of jumping to conclusions, you gather a lot of data. And so that became one of the habits of mind, is managing that impulse. And then other people talked about, well, if you can't find one way to solve it, you find another way. So that became thinking flexibly. In other words, these patterns of thinking seem to recur. And so I started collecting them and putting them together. And it appears in a book called Developing Minds. And there have been 3 editions of that. So it's been refined over the years and grown over the years. And basically speaking, what we said was that these are the behaviors and attributes of people who are effective problem solvers. And again, we didn't say that that was all of them, but rather that was the beginning of them. We started off with about 7. And then as we kept working, it grew to 12 and then 16. And at 16, we said, well, that's plenty to think about, but there could be more. And so we ended up then with a set of 16 thinking dispositions that are the attributes of what effective problem solvers, effective thinkers in many walks of life. whether you're a lawyer or a plumber or a teacher or a doctor. These are the behaviors and the attitudes and the dispositions that make you a good problem solver.